Good morning to all of you on this really beautiful Bangalore Saturday. It gives me great pleasure to be here with Poile, and now I see more friends coming in, so it's just lovely. Poile and I spoke to Poile earlier today, and I said, Poile, do you want me to do all the biographical detail? And she said, no, 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 Kirtana. So for the biographical detail, I'm going to have to ask you, especially young readers amongst you, to just Google Poile Sengupta. But what I would like to tell you is that I first met Poile sometime in the late 80s or early 90s during rehearsals of a play called Dungaji House by Cyrus Mistry. And most interestingly, I was doing makeup for Poile. I remember her sitting down and me doing makeup for her. Most interestingly, this book, A Higgledy Piggledy Growing Up, has Dungaji figures in it in the form of two Parsi sisters. So I would just invite all of you to look at the many ways in which literature and theatre have dots that connect them, and the many ways in which Poile's own literary journey is one of joining many dots, social, cultural, and literary. Regarding Poile's very, very prolific writing history, I'm not even going to mention the names, but I would like to share with young readers here that not only has she's written columns, she's written novels, she's written short stories, she's written innumerable books for young people, and she's already also written plays for young people. So I really do encourage you to just Google Poile, read Mangalam. I myself had the great pleasure of acting in Daspek Shurpanaka, again about 25 years ago, I would say, about this. So Poile and I go back a really long way through both literature and theatre. Now what I'd like to do is further set Poile's writing in the continuum, I wouldn't say the long continuum, the short continuum of Indian writing in English for young audiences. For people of my generation, and I'm sure Poile's as well, we came to reading through the works of Enid Blyton, Agatha Christie, Richard Cromwell, Richmill Cromwell, the Just William books, and so on and so forth, Georgette Eyre, all these books. Unfortunately for us, or fortunately, I don't see it so much as an unfortunate, but there wasn't really any Indian writing in English when we were young readers. Slowly along the way, we met a gentleman called R.K. Narayan, and we entered the gentle Mysorean or genteel world of Malgudi. Come sit up close. Through Swami and his friends Somu and Samuel, a lot of you must have already read Swami and Friends in Malgudi days. And the book, as you might remember, was written against the substratum of Gandhi's non-cooperation movement. And later we also met with Mr. Ruskin Bond, and we entered his universe of the Western Himalayas. But that was roughly about it. We didn't have a whole lot to delve into insofar as the subcontinent was concerned. Much like today, if you fast forward today, we have the Pari series with all these books which are based on actual research of migrant workers, of rural India, and we're getting really fine literature. We have publishers such as Katha and Tara and Tulika who are focused on children's literature and literature for young audiences, or what is now being called crossover fiction. Now, because I mentioned Tulika, I would like to read to you from a paper that Radhika Menon, the founder of Tulika, wrote for the National Big Book Trust, was having a conference in Trivandrum, and she wrote this very interesting paper giving us an overview of literature for young audiences. And in the paper, she writes, borrowing from African American literature, we can classify children's books as A, socially conscious, B, melting pot, and 3, culturally relevant. This sounds bland, but is useful. Socially conscious books, the least palatable, I might add, to children. Socially conscious books are those that are didactic, lacking in believable plot and characterization, and frequently reinforcing the very stereotypes they hope to overcome, and worse, creating a new set of stereotypes. The Melting Pot book focuses on the universal, ignoring subcultural differences. And the third category, the culturally relevant book, holds the greatest promise of presenting realistic images, both in words and pictures, to young audiences. Poile's writing very firmly falls into that last category: real, relevant, and always willing to take the mickey. The voices of her characters are diverse, as you will see when Nikhil and Aditi and I begin reading for you. From the protagonist Neil's shy teenage angst, to Mrs. Raj's Bengali inflections, to Pachama's sing-song rhythms, and they offer the reader the possibility of locating themselves, the reader somewhere within the book. Is Stuti here? Oh yeah, hi Stuti. At this point, I also must mention Stuti Sen's design, the cover design for this particular book. Because in the same paper written by Radhika Menon, she also refers to the very fascinating feature that emerges while tracing the history of the various panchatantras and indeed children's literature, all children's literature. And this refers to the various styles of illustrations that accompanied text, traditionally, historically, and even in the contemporary sense. From cave paintings to rock-cut panels, from classical miniatures to folk Nepali. So text and illustration were inseparable. So without further ado, let's do a deep dive into a Higgledy Piggledy Growing Up. I'd like to invite Nikhil, sitting here, to start off with the very first page of the book. Thank you, Nikhil.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Neil, and I want to tell you how I grew up suddenly in 3 months, between Jan and March this year. No, this is not a story of a medical marvel or anything unscientific like that. I'm very scientific, even though I wanted to be a footballer, world famous like Pele or Rooney. And now I want to write history textbooks. This is because our history textbooks are very, very boring. They are so boring that half the time I wish I could live on some planet which has just been discovered and therefore has no history. The strange thing about growing up is that it is so unnoticeable and so higgledy-piggledy, the word higgledy-piggledy, I learnt from my grandmother.
Just speak into it like so, it'll come back.
Anyway, about growing up, you never know when it happens, till some aunt or uncle you meet after years says, "Oh my, how you've grown. I would never have recognized you if I saw you on the road," etc. Well, I have grown up now, and it's April. I've checked my height against the pencil mark on the wall in my room. No change since January. I have looked into the mirror. My face shows nothing between my nose and my upper lip. You should see the boy next door, Rafi. I'm nearly 14 and Rafi is 3.5 years older. He's very tall and already has a thin line under his nose. How the girls run after him. I used to wonder if he drew a line there himself. He's very good in biology, especially in drawing. Of course, another way to find out about growing up is through your shoes. I seem to need a new pair every term. My mother says every 15 days, but I think that's an exaggeration. And then, apart from growing taller or getting a mustache, or finding your toes come out your shoes, there's one more way to check whether you've grown up. No, my voice has not yet broken. I wish mine would hurry up and break. Why call it breaking though? My voice is not a glass bottle. So, nothing seems to have changed in me in 3 months. And yet, everything around me has. Though I love football, I now want to read history books so that I can one day write a history textbook. But let me get down to my own story.
Thank you, Nikhil.
Thank you.
Nikhil, also, I know that you have a question for Poile, so would you go ahead with your question?
So, Auntie, it's pretty evident by these few paragraphs.
Say that, repeat that. Just go like so.
So, it's pretty evident by these few paragraphs that you've decided to write the book from the perspective of a 14-year-old. So, why did you choose to write it that way and not from your own perspective?
Is it working?
Yeah. You just have to hold it close.
Yeah. Well, thank goodness I haven't written it from my own perspective. That would be really boring. Huh? And the other thing, Nikhil, is that I've always wanted to be another voice. Maybe that's because later on I wrote drama too. It's more exciting to be somebody else than to be me. I find myself rather boring. So, and when I was growing up as a girl, I found boys had more fun, or at least I thought they had more fun. And I wished I could be a boy. Girls in my generation were cribbed and confined. We couldn't do this, we couldn't do that. Boys, my brothers seem to be doing everything, breaking windows, and running off with somebody else's bicycle and things like that. And I wished I could be mischievous. I wished I was allowed to be, and I wasn't. So being Neil is much more exciting than being me. That's why.
Thank you, Poile. Nikhil, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Poile, so when I first read the book, I mean, a lot of you have read, must have read Secret Diary of Adrian Mole. Age what? 13. Interestingly, Neil is exactly that age, 13 and 3/4. So my question to Poile is this. I really am very curious about his snarky yet vulnerable voice. He's very snarky and he's very vulnerable. Could you speak about how you developed his literary voice, please?
Well, Neil is, I think, I don't know whether Nikhil and Aditi will agree with me, but Neil is a person who is between ways, right? He's not a child. He would hate it if you called him a child. He's not an adult. His parents would hate it if we called him an adult. So he's between. He's an in-between. And in-betweens are like that. They are vulnerable. They are smart. They are articulate. They are not. They are midstream. Whether you go back or forward, they are midstream. And so they are confused. They are vulnerable and very endearing. So that's how Neil is. And that's why he's Higgledy Piggledy. Though there are many of them in the book who are Higgledy Piggledy, not just Neil. All of us, I think, are also Higgledy Piggledy in many ways.
Thanks, Poile. Yeah, and that's what makes him so funny as well and so relatable.
That's right.
Aditi, would you like to read something from the book, please?
Of course. But before I carry on, let me tell you a little about my family. We live in Bangalore, in a colony on the outskirts of the city. There were 7 of us once, living in the same space, which has a ground floor and a first floor. There is also a terrace right on top, from where you can see the other terraces and the tops of other houses, and a whole lot of washing lines with clothes wriggling on them. Honestly, you can't imagine how much washing is done in these houses. Ours too, of course. I must tell you that almost everyone in our colony seems to have a washing machine, but not a dryer. I don't know why. So, all the clothes are dried out in the sun. According to my mother, you can tell a lot about a family from the washing on their lines. There's a lot more to this observation than what meets the eye and ear. My grandfather and grandmother, who were born before India's independence, never climbed to the first floor or the terrace of our home. This house also holds their son, also my father, his wife, my mother and my uncle, my father's younger brother and his niece, also known as my pesky sister, and of course, my father's son, which is me. I thought I might draw a map of our house for you, but I gave up. Anyway, to get back to what happened that day, the day I began growing up. It was a Sunday morning when it all started. The ruckus, a crashing and a screaming and a wailing and a shouting. There was so much noise, such a racket, that I had to stop tying my shoelaces.
Thanks, Sadhu. You know, when I first read that paragraph, I don't know if you feel it, but it was Bangalore to me. It's when you're traveling on the metro and you see all these buildings with the yellow water tanks and the clothes hanging up. It just immediately, there was a picture of Bangalore for me. Poile, the next question I have for you is this. In this given moment in history when I find myself having to declare that I am in solidarity with Arundhati Roy and with her right to write and her right to speak, and I want to ask you about, or rather, one cannot ignore the embedded values that your book is dense with. For example, constitutional values are held really highly, gender parity, social justice. Could you comment on the relevance of this today? Actually, wait, there's further to that. Just one more note. You know, when I was reading it, I really felt as a couple. So Abhijit has written his book, Queen of Democracy, Queen of All Nations. followed by this book. And it felt like Queen of All Nations was addressing a certain collegiate audience and people who needed to understand the workings of democracy. Followed soon after by Higgledy Piggledy. And I really felt the power of both of them. So my question comes to you in that frame.
Well, I don't know whether it's good to be partnered with a spouse as far as writing goes. Abhijit did an enormous amount of research for his book, which is non-fiction. I don't think I can ever write non-fiction because I need to use my imagination, and that's all I do. But about constitutionality and the very interesting question you're asking me, Kirtana, the point that I kept thinking about as Abhijit was writing his book is that young people don't seem to be very aware of it, don't seem to be very aware of who we are as a people of this country, of this nation, of India. And I felt that I ought to talk about it not directly, not upfront, in a tangential way, make them realize, sort of ask them to look sideways and look at this amazing document of our Constitution. And gender parity, of course, is something that they would be aware of, many of them, because it's so much in the news. But it happens in our own lives, isn't it? That's what, when Kirtana talked about connecting the dots, that's one of those various dots that I tried to connect through a story.
I think you say that most beautifully, Poile, because when all of you read the book, and I hope you will, you'll see that this is the higgledy-piggledy nature of it is this, that all these issues, they come glancing at us and glancing off us. And it's up to us to make meaning of them. And nobody is sitting and, instructing you like in a bad civics class. I don't know if any of you sat through a bad civics class, but it's not that. Yeah, all of them are bad. But it's not that, right? This comes to you through drama and through mystery and through humor. And yet the substratum is very clear, much like in R.K. Narayan. The substratum of independence was so vivid there. And here the substratum of constitutionality and what it means to be part of a really large and diverse and multicultural country is very evident. The next question I had actually is, there's a book that my students have brought to my notice. It's through all of them that I first read The Night Diary by Veera Hiranandani. And when I read your book, the grandmother's last words were Inkilab. The references to the independence movement are very clear, to heroes of independence and so on. Would you like to speak about this further?
Yeah, I wanted the generation whom we saw, who had been part of the independence movement, because this generation of young people are far removed. They are twice removed from that. And so they wouldn't know about what struggles went on, how it was to be under the British. They don't know. We didn't know either, because we were born in the Midnight's children, that's what we were. But we ought to know, right? And unfortunately, our history texts, I don't know how they are now, they seem to be much worse. Our history texts were really things that you couldn't relate to. And usually history period was after lunch when everyone was sleepy and yawning. So the book made them yawn even more. And, the kings built broad avenues and they had lots of gems in their treasury and things like that. They didn't talk about real things. Neither did civics. Oh God, civics. So, and to be a history and civics teacher was one of the most difficult things to be. And I decided one day to tell my class to write a question paper on the chapter rather than me write the question paper. I said, you do it, which was good fun because then they realized what exactly they're up against. But it's true that we don't know our history. We don't know who we are. And we won't know who we are unless we talk about what happened in the past, not to carry it as a burden, but to carry it as a lesson or as an opener, eye-opener, to be made aware, not as a burden, not to bring it forward and say, I don't like Tipu because he did this, and things like that. No, not with prejudice and bias, but with understanding. That's what I hoped to do. I don't know whether I have.
I think you certainly have, Poile. And are you trying to say that the dates for the Battle of Panipat are not important?
I'll tell my history teacher that next time.
Because those of you who remember Kundra and Kundra, remember the history textbook Kundra and Kundra? Which would just bore us half to death. And nothing remains of it, not even the date for the Battle of Panipat. So I would rather get my history through the stories and through the remembrances of real people who lived through the action. Is it okay if I read a little from your textbook now? Okay. I'm now reading to you from this beautiful book. It's page 142. And further to what Poile was saying, and Nikhil and Aditi, and I think Ishan and Ishan and Vihan and Maya here in the audience were nodding ferociously too. School was more boring than usual. Even the teachers' scolds lacked pulp. They were like squashed lemons. In the last period, which was Hindi, Miss Rupa made a surprise announcement. Miss Rupa usually speaks only in very elevated Hindi, which I usually cannot understand. This time, however, after all the Krupya and Drishyakon, she actually translated it into a language I could understand. Apparently, it was time for us to contribute to our notice board with our thoughts on our India. This was the theme given this time. It was so much like an exam question that I felt sure it was Miss Swami's idea. Do you love your country? If so, why? If not, why not? You should submit your entries in a week, said Miss Rupa. And as she finished, Miss Swami poked her face and her painted smile into the classroom. I hope you understood the announcement, children, she chirped, and will contribute a lot. Your entry could be in the form of a small paragraph, just a couple of lines, a drawing, anything at all. Or a poem, perhaps, Neil? She giggled, and her face, with that plastic smile, disappeared. The bell rang, and we all started to pack our bags and leave in as orderly a way as possible. Outside, the air was cold, and I walked home alone as usual. I wished Ari was in our school. I was sure I would have been able to talk to him about the puzzlements in my mind. Why, for instance, did I dislike Hindi so much? Was it because I had never read a fun book in Hindi? Was it also because almost all my Hindi teachers had been unsmiling people who had taught me the language as if it was some kind of punishment? Learn this or else. How does one love a language? How does one love a country? How does one love another person, someone who is not part of your family? When will my mustache grow? I didn't think any of my classmates would be asking themselves these questions, except maybe the last one about the mustache. Would Ari have asked himself those other questions? I was almost home and so deep in my thoughts that I did not notice a little white bundle waddling towards me. It jumped up to lick me with a very wet tongue. Can't understand why this fellow loves you so much, said a surly voice from behind me. Rafi. He shifted his heavy school bag and took Dog into his arms and away from me. Dog licked his face madly. Rafi's face. A face with a thin line above the lips. I went home. We were now well into February and the teachers had gone into revision mode. This meant so many tests and so many assignments that I had no time to even think of football. Also, something else happened that was quite nasty. I had gone on a Sunday afternoon to practice with Ari. Unusually, he was not alone. There were some other boys with him. Ari greeted me rather strangely. ... I'll leave that for you to read about. I was wondering whether you would want to speak about the character of Rafi, since I mentioned him here, Poile, and he is a bit of a surprise.
Yeah, he is. He's like any next door neighbor whom one is jealous of. I'm sure it happens with a lot of children because they seem to have everything that one doesn't. And Rafi certainly had a moustache, and the girls were running after him. And he was tall, he seemed to be very attractive. And Neil wasn't sure about whether he himself was. He thought for a while he was, but that went put. So Rafi is a person one would like to know a little more of, but I leave it to you, readers, to figure out for yourself how Rafi would be if he was talking to you.
And also the history of Rafi's name.
Ah, shall I keep that a secret?
Yes.
Yeah, I shall keep that
We'll
a
leave
secret.
it intriguing for you. Can I invite Aditi to read now?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite parts of the book. This is what Neil wrote for his bulletin board. I do not know whether I love my country or not. When I think of all the poor people of India, of how they live without clean water, without food, without houses, when I see our leaders thinking only of becoming rich and powerful, fighting over language and religion, then I feel our country is the worst in the world. But then I look at my grandmother's face, full of lines and wrinkles and black smudges. It is not beautiful, but there is history in her face. And I am part of that history. I am part of India's history. I have the power to make my country smile again. When my grandmother smiles, her tired eyes light up and she is beautiful once more. My country asked me to make her beautiful once again. I love my country.
Thanks, Adu. And you had a question for Poile.
I did. There are so many parts of intrigue and mystery in the book, like the strangers of Tree Boy and Ari, and the names of Mani, the coconut tree climber. Could you tell us a little bit about how these threads of mystery add to literature that young people read?
You know, when you write for young people, and I think also for older people, you must have a good, strong plot. There must be a good story. And if there isn't, people normally drop the book. So it's very important that I have characters who I can draw into for making up a plot. And the tree boy, for instance, he's this chap who, when he was young, he would stand very still with his arms up. He was playing hide and seek. And there were no trees to hide behind, so he would be the tree. So Neil goes and asks him, but, don't your friends know that it's you and not a tree? And the boy looks at him in a very pitying way and says, don't you realize I'm a tree? They know I'm a tree and I'm hiding. So hide and seek, I've won. The den can't find me. So that's the tree boy. That other chap, the gardener, who had many names, that actually happened. And there is Rebecca here who will support me in this, because we had a gardener who called himself by one name in our house. The same person was called by another name in their house. He had a third name in somebody else's, and he answered to every name. Remarkable character. And then I wondered, but I'm glad I didn't write about that, about how we carry our identity so close to us. If somebody spells our name wrong, we don't like it, right? So we are very attached to our names. Should we be? I don't know.
And interestingly, the book is, once again, there are so many different kinds of names, which makes you really think about the etymology of the name, of the family that they come from, where they grew up, what language they spoke at home. And again, this reminded me very much of, Bangalore, traveling on the metro and seeing those clothes hanging out to dry, and knowing as well that the people who live here speak very many different languages. For instance, there's one family that's referred to as the banjo family. They play music, hence banjo. Further to that, you'll have to read and find out.
Yes, I do have a problem when writing in English because, our names carry a lot of baggage. That's why I haven't used many surnames in the book. Because if I used a name like Chatterjee or like Krishnaswamy, you would know where they come from, that character. And maybe I don't want that to happen. I don't want people to know where they come from, because I don't know where I come from. I was born in a certain place, yes, but that's about it. So it's difficult. And in writing in English, that is a difficulty. When you read books written outside India, they're Toms and Micks and Harrys and all that. Doesn't matter where they come from, because we don't know where they come from.
It's a really good point you make, Poile. And I think that additionally, that lends to this very wide open feeling of middle class India and post independent middle class India. You can almost visualize the way the homes looked, the colonies that they lived in, just by this. Because the minute you have the surname, it has an entirely different identity. When I was asking Poile if there was anything in particular she'd like me to read, she said, please read about Twinkle because she's so funny. Twinkle comes from the Banjo family, incidentally, and her brothers' names are a whole constellation. Orion, Sirius, and so on. Twinkle Little Star here. So what happens with Neil is one day Twinkle kind of latches onto Neil, and so begins the story of Twinkle's presence in Neil's life. Hi, she squealed. How nice to see you. The dog growled. I did not expect you to be here, she cooed. I was about to say that since this was my house where I lived with my parents and grandparents, when she put her finger to her lips and came closer. Shh, she growled. Sorry, it was the dog that growled. Shh, we must be careful, she whispered, almost killing my ear. If my brothers see me here, they will finish you. They will cut your throat. Why? I asked, also whispering. Stupidly, I should have just walked away, but brains never work till it's too late. Think of Muhammad bin Tughlaq. Twinkle looked at me in a funny kind of simpering way. Because you, she giggled. The dog let out a dreadful growl and bared its teeth. I think it was at me. Oh, Tiny, she said, and giggled again. You don't have to be so jealous. Do you know, this time to me, I suppose, do you know Tiny is so jealous of you? He's a silly dog, isn't he? Stop it, Tiny, stop it now. Since the dog kept on with its furious sounds, I assumed those last words were to it, but it could have also been to the blessed drops of rain that began pelting down. Oh, I must run, she shrieked. They'll murder me if Tiny gets cold. She gave me another simpering coy look. I'm so sorry. I know you'd have liked me to stay, but the growling dog with its thick coat and its apparent capacity to catch a cold dragged her away. I went in and up to my room. I could not get down to any work. I was still shaking a bit with the recent close encounter, and I was also thinking of my future. Was my entire life to be about how to dodge this girl and her blasted dog? Was this what it was to be? Avoiding her somehow at school and then finding her lying in wait at my gate? Lying in wait at the gate. Lying in wait at the gate. And suddenly, in the strange way in which these things happen, I got my idea for the history project. I would write a poem, and this is what I did. In 1947, we became independent. Gandhi asked our foreign rulers to go. We were free of the British at last. No more their colony, nor they our foe. India was free, but not yet a nation. Sardar Patel spoke to royalty defenders. He said India should be a democratic republic, so India could vote for their own leaders. In 1950, we became a sovereign democratic republic. Dr. Ambedkar wrote for us a brand new constitution. All Indians, young, old, literate or not, became the rightful owners of the nation. We vote for leaders from amongst us. We no longer have kings and queens. Our flag that Jawaharlal Nehru unfurled is the most beautiful that I have seen. In our country, we all have equal rights. This is promised us by our constitution. We are citizens of an indivisible nation. The colors of our flag is our representation. Let us sing Jana Gana Mana out loud. Let us salute our flag as it proudly unfurls. No one can demean us or our India. We shall be the best anywhere in the world, everywhere in the world. I finished the poem after a lot of crossing outs and getting angry with those miserable rhyming words that don't mean what I want them to mean. Also, I was angry with myself for wanting to mix poetry with history. What an idiot I am, I said to myself quite a number of times. That day, I hoped that Mrs. D'Souza wouldn't fling my poor effort into the waste paper basket. She had done it to my homework book before. I think many historians are like Mrs. D'Souza. Look at your history textbook. Every chapter criticizes somebody or the other. Of course, now I have a different opinion about Mrs. D'Souza. Poile, now comes to the question which is actually for me, you'll be helping me with this one. What on earth is crossover fiction?
I wish I knew. I imagine it is something that grows. That is, you start at one end and it grows and grows and grows and embraces a whole lot of things you didn't think it would. I imagine that this is a book pitched for young adults, but young adults could be of the age of 80 or 85 or 90. Maybe that's what crossover means. It doesn't seem to be to do with clothes, isn't it? Because you have crossover, what are double breast jackets and things like that. No, I think this is what it is. That it is something that expands and isn't restricted to one particular age segment. In fact, young adult, that category itself is a little bewildering. I don't know whether you, Aditi and Nikhil, consider yourselves children. No. Do you think you're adults? No, not adults?
Not really.
Not yet. So young adult, what does it actually mean? I don't know. Kirtana, are we adults? I don't know. Oh, I know.
Not at heart.
Not at all. There you are. So I don't know what the young adult category is. One has to be careful with age groups that are much, much younger. So 4, 5, 8, 10. Up to about 11, 12, I think you can be fairly sure of where you are. But after 12, no. There are 12-year-olds who know much more about a great deal than I do.
So it's probably a publishing term then, no?
Yeah.
For purposes of ease, but which actually really doesn't, to readers, because I know from my students, they read literature that has really lent a lot to me. Also, I've made a big mess of things as well. For example, they would talk a lot about a book that I thought was FALTINAS like Mallory Towers. I thought there was a book called Fault in Our Towers. Later, I realized it was A Fault in Our Stars. But for the longest time, I thought it was Fault in Our Towers. So anyway, I think that has an issue. The issue here is one of articulation. But really, they read books that are, I don't think they can be categorized as readers, as that they would only read books which are 11 to 18 years of age, marked PG-13 or something. I really don't think so. So that's probably a publishing term.
And a bookseller's term, because they have shelves, they put particular books on particular shelves. So then they need YA in large letters, and then they put the books that they think are for young adults, whoever they are. That's possible too.
Yeah.
And the publishers sort of nudge them into doing that.
Yeah, but as a writer, do you resent that?
Yeah, I do. I find it very difficult because Lewis Carroll, for instance, is Alice in Wonderland a young adult or a children's book? It doesn't seem to be. Queen Victoria read it. She wasn't a child as far as I know.
Yeah, so this is also, it's further to the capitalist framework that takes over the world of books. Because when we were growing up, did you ever read a book that was written for children alone when you were 15 years old? No, you didn't. You just read whatever was on the bookshelf, no? So, yeah. The other thing is, Poile, and this we see a lot in the theater, and I know it's entering the world of literature as well, but it's the patronizing voice. It's a didactic patronizing voice, which is the minute something is written for young readers, the voice and the tone becomes very moralistic. And what will be talked about, for example, there will be subjects that will not be talked about so keep the books PG-13. What do you have to say with that and the struggle about that?
Oh, lot of struggle. I'm glad publishers are a little more open-minded now. I wrote a book long ago when I used the word bathroom, and that was scratched out. I wasn't to use the word bathroom, and washroom wasn't in our terminology then. So the story was about how this servant maid hid some money which she had stolen in the soap bucket in the bathroom, the soap dish in the bathroom. So I couldn't say that. And they suddenly discovered, the characters in the book discovered that the money was in the drawing room under an idol, which apparently was okay. And there were so many other things that I couldn't say. I couldn't talk about death. Now, every child who grows up, every aware child, whichever class they are in, however old they are, would know about people dying, about people growing old. They see it all around them. Why say things that are not plausible? Why do you mollycoddle children? Because children are extremely intelligent. They are very perceptive. They are very intelligent. They may not have our vocabulary, but they know. They know what's happening. They know about family quarrels. They know about relationships. They may not be able to put it across to somebody else, but they do know. I'm not saying you have to, be all agog about talking about death and things like that. But of course, you can talk about demons and people who have their mouths in their stomach, because we read that in the Panchatantra, in Jataka tales. They're all very adult literature, but they are meant for children. So what do you do? And didacticism, preachiness, oh no, I've had enough of it. You read a biography of somebody in India, and all the time you're being told, you have to be like this person. You have to give up everything for your country. You have to wear khadi. You have to go barefoot. I mean, don't let me get into this, because then we'll run out of time.
Actually, that the issue, the bathroom thing, it really horrifies me, and it makes me ask: was it an agent, a publisher? Was it Indian? Was it not?
Indian publisher.
Really shocking, considering that. Really shocking, considering Shiva and Parvati, their son, the head was cut off, an elephant was planted on, and there's so much that a child's imagination can absorb, and so many leaps of faith the mind makes, which is so transcendent. So then why would we get caught on something? It just seems that there has to be a huge pushback from the artistic community and a huge resistance to this kind of dictatorial management of language, for example. Is it okay if I read another little piece for you? Am I okay for time, Lekha? Just give me an idea of how many minutes more. Yeah, sounds good.
Kirtan has done so much work on this.
This is a piece that I really wanted to read because I feel it so much, and I really think about my students a lot. It's from page 160, and this happens after there's been a certain incident that happens in the book, which I won't tell you about, but it's kind of a catalyzing incident in the book. And the principal makes this speech to the students. Dear children and staff of the school that I love so much, today is one of the saddest days of my life. When we decided to start a wall newspaper where you, my dear students, could express your opinions freely, it was with the intention of shaping you all to be independent thinkers. We wanted you to go out into the world, not just distinguished in academics, but as young people with minds of your own, capable of thinking outside your textbooks, wise in how you use the knowledge you have, ready to keep learning every day of your lives. These days, when our country is going through such turmoil, it seemed to us that your young, fresh voices could give us the energy to carry on our work of making our country strong, of showing the world that we have not forgotten the message of peace and non-violence that Mahatma Gandhi taught us and for which he died. We did receive such pieces for the wall newspaper, and you also saw that we received others. Here, I remember, she paused, almost stopped. Then she continued. We received articles from our students that we had not expected. We have put them up because we had said that this was a place where you could express your opinions, whatever those may be. So after much debate, we put up these pieces, but we crossed out the names of the writers. This was done so that the writers do not face any backlash from other students or the parents of other students. The wall newspaper shall be taken down after this, and for the time being, we shall not continue with it. It is time for your annual exams, and we shall all have to start work on that. She paused again, then said, the opinions expressed by some students have hurt many of us. Of course, we want you to be independent in your thinking. You don't all have to be Mahatma Gandhi or Martin Luther King. But there is just one thing I would like you to remember. We are all different in the way we look, the food we eat, the language we speak, the gods we pray to. We are different, but these differences need not and should not divide us. Dear beloved students, hate is corrosive. It eats us up. Accept difference with joy. That's what makes the world an exciting place.
Thank you, Kirtana. This is a very sad part of the book, and actually it is this part that was most difficult for me to write because it hurt me to write it, and also I didn't know how I would be regarded, whether I would be trolled for having written it. It was written in those times. Thank God it's changed a little bit now.
Nikhil, you had two lovely questions, and I'd like you to ask both of them to Poile, please.
So, Auntie, we spoke about why you wrote the book as a 14-year-old. So, how did you manage to write it so accurately? And how much research would have gone into that?
I didn't do much research, Nikhil. I just closed my eyes, forgot that I was me, and became Neil. I've done this before. I had, for 30 years, been a person called Perky, who wrote in a magazine called Children's World, which is still published in Delhi. But Perky is not there anymore. And I was Perky. For 30 years, he was a 10, 11-year-old boy with a very, very naughty friend. And this friend had this terrific idea of changing the spellings in English because his logic was very clear. He said when K-N-O-C-K, the first K is not pronounced, it's knock. Why don't we just write N-O-C-K? And if the K is not pronounced, then I could write any consonant there. I could write G or R because it's not going to be pronounced anyway. So he was like that. So he would write words that were not part of the dictionary and say, I give it life, I give it life, I give it life. Of course, he got very, very poor marks in English.
I remember talking about that the last time we met in your last book discussion. Also, you've left Dhruv's murder unsolved. So, did you not want to build up on that, or is it a hint of a sequel?
sequel. I have not written sequels really. But Dhruv's murder, there are so many murders like that, Nikhil, which are unsolved in actual life. Aren't there? Journalists who have disappeared, journalists who are not to be found. We don't know what happened to them. We believe something horrible has, but we don't know. That's why I left it unsolved. About a sequel, no. I wrote Higgledy Piggledy as a reaction to Inga, which was my first novel for, well, adults. And I had to get away. That was a very literary novel. It echoed literature, English literature. So I decided I couldn't stay with that because that Inga really haunted me for a while. So I got away from that and wrote about Neil, who was, down to earth and didn't read too much. Wanted to be somebody big, but not yet there. So the next one is going to get away from Neil too, because I don't want him to haunt me now. I may start kicking a football around and smashing all the flower pots in your house.
Yes. So, do you think that other schools should implement the idea of a bulletin board for students to talk about happening events?
I would love it if they did, but there is a risk there, right? So, I don't know what one can do about that. There has to be discussion. There have to be spaces for children, areas and classrooms or wherever, where they talk about what they feel. But you put it up on a bulletin board for everybody to see and you don't know what toxic things may come up. I'm not sure. This is a very, very difficult question to answer, Aditi. Really, it is. In fact, you, young people, would know more about it than I, perhaps.
I think that's true. Why don't Nikhil and Aditi, why don't you tell us? So the bulletin boards, this is the last detail we will speak of before we go over to the audience. But in the book narrative, as per the narrative, there's a bulletin board put up and students can air their opinions on it. It's an unmediated board. What do you feel? I personally would love it.
I think it's a really good idea for students to share what they think because it's really important to understand each other's opinions. But when an opinion that becomes harmful is aired, it creates a sense of, distrust, and people aren't sure who's thinking what, and it impacts the entire school. Nikhil, what do you think?
So it would be a good idea, but again, like in the book, what happened? So that's something which you don't want to happen. So it has its own pros and cons, I would say.
And yet those feelings don't go away. You can't do them away by
stays.
not having them on the board, right? And not talking about them. So young people of various ages, we'd now like to open this up to the audience, but not before I tell you that this book is really a valuable one to share with young audiences. I would encourage you to get multiple copies, not only just because it is good. It is good that, and it's important that we share it at this moment in time. All of you, I hope all of you read it, but also further that you spread it outwards. And on that note, can I open it up to the audience? Anupama.
Thanks.
Thank you for a Saturday morning well spent. I enjoyed every minute of the discussion. I've taught history, civics, geography for middle school in a residential school myself and came up with several ideas for making the subjects more fun and creative. And they were not subjects that were my favorite until I taught them. So they just had an opening for a history teacher and I said, that's one subject I don't know, but I saw it through the eyes of the children I taught and came up with a lot of things. So I'd love to explore with either of both of you or even a group of people ways of how we can make these subjects more interesting in the classroom. So they end up loving civics because I did this in 2013, 2014, and I was a booth volunteer for the Aam Aadmi Party during the 2014 general elections. So I took pictures of the EVM and told them about my experience of being a booth volunteer. We conducted a mock election in class. So there are ways of making it interesting, and we can work on that.
Absolutely.
Using theater, using so many different tools. To explain the Earth's crust in geography, which I found the dullest subject, I actually took Ferrero Rocher to class and said, "This is what the Earth's crust is like."
Lovely.
Yeah. So
Thanks,
things
Anupama.
like that.
Yeah.
And what you were saying about bulletin boards, I would suggest starting with them in the classroom, and along with the teacher, where you have a class teacher period where you discuss anything and everything goes, but there are rules about being respectful, but no curation. And if something comes up that's disrespectful, then you process it in a kind way, in a safe space.
Absolutely.
So I would, maybe a bulletin board for a school or a college gives anonymity, so you can put anything out there because you can hide behind it. But in a classroom, pretty much everybody will know, even from your handwriting or, when you wrote it. So maybe within classrooms is better than for the larger school or for the college is what I would suggest. And they do have essential
We're not going to be
agreements.
doing this. We're not going to be doing it in schools.
Yeah.
But it's great to ideate around this.
Yeah,
And I think fundamentally what Poile's book talks about, or even if it doesn't, it's omnipresent in the book, is the idea of participation. That if children are not taught that their participation in our civic life is vital, how are they supposed to vote with responsibility?
That's true.
And how are they supposed to know that the part that they play in a democracy?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you.
Any other? Thanks, Anupama. Other questions? Yes, Ishan. And Vihan, yes.
1 second. You'll have to speak into the mic.
Okay, so as someone who's lived in Bangalore for like their life, I've noticed that over the years, Bangalore's development and how it's changed is it's become more segregated in terms of its living space. So when young people in Bangalore grow up in a Bangalore that's a lot more segregated than it was in 1970, 1990, in the 2000s, what legacy do you think this book upholds?
Well, first, I have to tell you that Neil would be very jealous of your voice. Legacy, I really don't know how one can project one's book into the future. I've written it. I'm hoping a lot of people will read it. I'm hoping they will read it enough to think about it. But I'm really not sure. I hope it will be something that will be read maybe as a supplementary text in a school or a college. Parents would advise children to read it or whatever. I hope that happens. But legacy is too far away for me to think about.
Could I just rephrase the question? Okay, so if not legacy, like we as people already live in like these separate societies, they're gated communities. Do you think something like a mixed neighborhood or something like that would be as relatable to these people as it would be probably a few years ago?
I hope it will, but it doesn't seem to be happening like that now. I hope we don't have little bubbles, ghettos. I was trying not to avoid that word. I hope that doesn't happen because we are khichdi. We should be khichdi. Khichdi is exciting to eat. It's not an invalid food. It's got a great deal of different kinds of texture and smells and scents and bites and smoothness and everything. That's how it should be. We are like that. Like biryani and khichdi and avial and it's good to compare ourselves to food, isn't it?
It really is.
It's sort of neutral.
Vihan, you had a question as well? Or, no, go ahead.
sorry.
No, go ahead. Why don't you go ahead first?
So I teach epistemology for grades 11 and 12 in the IB curriculum. And what I have experienced in my years of teaching is that, when you and I were growing up, we would have these debate competitions in school, right? So initially, when the students come to me, it's more about debating and trying to convince each other about each other's perspectives, right? But then I've realized over the years that a step back from the debating format and just an open discussion, to explore multiple perspectives, itself makes people more respectful about each other's opinions, right? So I think one thing that I would really like to, if there are teachers here in schools, to really advocate is that I think we all need to really move away from the debating format, because debates are, we know what happens on TV debates, right? So, and that is what is exactly played out in a classroom. And then the whole fundamental of being international minded, being global citizens, the whole thing fails. It just falls apart. So I think just discussions on exploring perspectives is a fantastic way of preparing our children for for a world where there are no boundaries in the mind. Geographical boundaries are for countries, but then we look at ourselves as a whole nation, right? The world being a nation, right? With its own multicultural aspects. I'm looking at it from that point. What do you have to say?
What a terrific
I know.
insight.
That's a really
And
fabulous
especially-
observation.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially the TV debates things, because I know all of us get mad when we listen to certain people. Yeah, one doesn't have to be in opposition all the time, or in an argumentative mood. We have the argumentative Indian. We don't need to be. In fact, discussion is where we respect each other's opinions and we say, oh, you've taught me something new. I didn't look at it that way before you said it. Now, why not? Why not? Even views that are very, very different from ours, we can at least think about them, hear them, listen to them. We don't have to agree, perhaps. But I think what you said is absolutely the right, I shouldn't even put it like that, is the way it should be. That we open ourselves up to every opinion, every viewpoint, every perspective that we come across, and hope others do the same. And that will be a very exciting world to live in.
Absolutely.
Because, there's so much to learn, isn't there? Every day, every moment.
Yeah.
We can never stop learning.
Yeah. And further to, if I might add something, what you observed actually is also connected to a certain toxic dominance.
Absolutely.
Or, of like, this is correct. This
Yeah.
is the way it has to be.
Yeah.
And which is really divisive. And within that, there's no
Yes.
meeting across the table and there's no space for conversation. I wouldn't even call it discussion, but for rather conversation. When can we converse and have different opinions and
Yeah.
just listen?
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
Also, that I think we talk about values with for our kids, and as Polly said, it becomes very preachy. But I think this is a very subtle and a very impactful way of teaching children that it's okay to disagree, but gracefully.
And have lots of laughter. Have you ever heard laughter on a TV channel?
Except if it's derisive or something. Vihan?
I've like a couple of questions. So, firstly, I believe there's a chapter about where like Neil talks about his like Hindi lesson, which you read out, which is a quite relatable instinct. So, considering like the variety of languages in Bangalore, both local and considering the wealth of people here who may not be like Kannada, do you think that the way do you think that second languages are taught well in school? Are they taught right?
Oh boy.
And secondly, do you because we talked about like the use of age groups for reading levels, do you think that there's a substitute for age groups for like gauging reading levels, or if we should even gauge reading levels at all?
I didn't follow your second question.
Do you wish to gauge reading levels or just leave it open?
I'll answer the second question first because that's easier. It depends on so much, It depends on where you live, which school you go to, and what the medium of instruction is in that school, and various other factors. So it is difficult to categorize reading, because I could write for a 4-year-old in an English medium Montessori school in a certain way, but that may not get across to somebody who's studying in a rural school, perhaps in Kannada, who doesn't quite understand the English language. So this is something that, as a writer, all writers for children face, because the landscape is so different. The readership is so different each time. But how much can you go by, wondering who's going to read it? So you have to fix on one and hope it'll get across to others too. As for languages are beautiful. Every language is beautiful. Every language has its own rhythms, its own evocative echoes, and its own way of expressing itself. For instance, when you talk in English terms about robin redbreast, I've never seen one. I never had gingerbread cookies.
Or potted
when I
shrimp.
did, yeah. And when I did, I hated it. Now, difficulty is making idli sounds delicious. But that's our food. Or making kebab. Well, kebabs are very delicious, I guess. So languages do that. You have images that are your images. You talk about somebody who is very attached to somebody else, like sticky rice. Sticky rice, overboiled rice, is very much Indian. But you can't write about it in those terms for an English person, for a person living in England, who may not understand sticky rice, but will certainly understand something that is sticky, like sticky toffee. I once had sticky toffee and my tooth came out with the toffee.
Poile, but regarding what you just said, how come we spent so many generations getting a Western context? Nobody translated for us potted shrimp or gingerbread or anything, but yet our minds made leaps of faith. So my argument is, why will not the powers that be and publishers and agents and all of this allow Indian literature or subcontinental literature to have the same access and reach? I don't understand why idli should not be understood by somebody sitting in England, a child.
Exactly. Now it is, I think, in certain parts of the world. But why not? Because we accepted everything that we read and felt them to be true. And our mouths watered as they should when Enid Blyton talked about a tea party. Why can't we do that too? But Indian writers also should have that courage to say, I will write about myself, or I will write about what I know, and I will not ape those other books that I read. Some of those things, for instance, like gollywogs, we didn't realize at that time that they were not to be, that they were...
Or how racist it
how
was.
racist it was. We didn't even think that way. Now suddenly they're removing all these things and taking out the josh from literature.
But that is
sanitizing
another,
it.
But that's a different
sanitizing.
issue.
That's a different issue.
The colonial
I
issue
agree,
we face
yeah.
is that they don't wish our literature to travel
Yeah.
the way that their literature travels. So that is where the lobby, that's where we need to lobby.
Yeah, that's where we need to be accepted as literature.
Yeah.
And not as something exotic from India. No, we are not exotic. We are like them. We are urban. We also, well, largely, and we also have people like people there, and we should be accepted and seen that way. Give us our dignity.
I think there are two questions, Mr. Dasgupta and Rebecca. Yeah.
Poile, this is actually not a question, but a suggestion. You will perhaps agree with me that one of the things which unifies us, why us, even others also, is we all love to gossip, and if it is spiced with a bit of scandal, it becomes that much juicier, and it spreads. And it spreads by word of mouth from one locality to another, and soon the myth becomes a reality. Now, almost like Chinese whispers. Our friend, many people here in BIC would know him, Vivek Shanbag, has a very endearing term for that. He calls it ghachar ghochar. And he has written a book on that, which has become a bestseller. Now, suggestion is when the Higgledy Piggledies ultimately grow up, will they do some ghachar ghochar, and maybe Poile Sengupta will write on that?
Well, the Higgledy Piggledy people in Higgledy Piggledy, when they do grow up, if they do, then and they become Vivek Shanbags, why not?
Rebecca, you had a question?
This is not really a question, but to continue to what you said about us reading Enid Blyton and understanding all the food they ate, etc. I guess it's just a question of time because now when you have publishers like those blue books with the white writing, I don't know what there's some. They're in the UK, but they translate like Annie Ernaux, and there's a Polish woman who writes, and it's just beautifully translated. So it's a question of translation, not just writing. But you're writing in English, so
That's the rub. See, they accept translations.
Yeah.
Because somehow the translation is palatable. But when subcontinental writers are writing in English, which is a very particular kind of English, that is what so-called the power irks them. They love translation. They really love translation. But it's Indian writing in English that faces the challenge.
They love
I think we should be more confident, that's all.
Yeah, and keep banging on the doors and holding fast. So
the translations, because that means that we are still the Orient, we are still exotic, and we are still something to be looked at and admired, but not accepted. When we write in English, in our English, about our country, about ourselves, then they find, they go like that.
But are there any more questions, or are we calling it a morning and all heading back to our khichdi, bisibele baat, biryani, in my case, dal, chawal and bendekai? Oh, there's a question. Oh, another question.
So, my question is about writing, actually. Ma'am told that you lived a character for 30 years. Right? Now I'm working on a book. So it's about the life that I lived 2 years back. Now I'm a completely different person. The things that gave me a lot of pain or that really haunted me is not haunting me anymore. I feel like I'm a healed person. So, but I want to tell the story. The problem is, for me, if I don't feel it, I can't write. That I should really feel the pain or happiness in the moment, then only I can write. So that's why I feel I'm not feeling the passion for the book. But passion is there. I want to tell the story. But I'm feeling I can't write that book to give the love or the fire that book deserves, because I can't live that life again just by seeing the image or reading that messages. I have GB of data on that to go back and live. But this is a fear that is going through in me. So I want to write it, but I feel like I'm not capable of writing it. So how do I solve it? If you can share it with your experience, because you have written for children, right? You can feel it and write it. So yeah, that's my question.
Thank you for a very beautiful and painful question. Yes, I agree completely with you that unless you feel that passion again, which you felt 2 years ago, your book will not come alive. You need to feel that pain. I think all writers, do you agree, Kirtana? That Kirtana is an author too. So yes, one does need to feel that pain. It's not easy. It's very, very difficult. When I wrote Inga, which is about a woman who has very, very deep feelings for her girl cousin, and it isn't a situation that I have been in, but I had to be the protagonist and go through her pain for me to be able to write that book. And it gave me a lot of pain. I cried sometimes when I wrote the book because I felt that pain. When I wrote the play Shurpanakha and Shakuni, in which Kirtana acted, Shurpanakha's pain I had to feel before I could write it. You don't even get the words for it because the emotions are so deep. That happens too. Unfortunately, that is something you will need to go through. You must also have, certain safety valves so that it doesn't hurt you too much. You have to detach yourself, and that detachment comes when you feel the pain, go through the pain, and put it in words. Putting it in words distances you a little bit. That is the safety valve. So that is what you will have to do. It's painful and it takes time, but it has to be done. But all the best. I'm sure you'll go through it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
This brings us to the end of this lovely morning. Poile, thank you so much, Poile. I'd also like to thank Abhijit, who's been just Abhijit, I have to thank you too. Unending support. Lekha and all of you at BIC, Manas, thank you so much. Also Stuti, who's here and who made the lovely cover. Aditi, Nikhil, and all of you in the audience who witnessed us, who listened, who had thoughts and who shared questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Poile. Thank you, Kirtana, for so readily agreeing to do this and putting this so beautifully together. Thank you, Nikhil and Aditi, for bringing your youth to the proceedings. Thank you, everyone, for spending your Saturday morning with us.